Hey, welcome back to Female Founder World. I'm the host of the show. I am the creator of all things Female Founder World. My name's Jasmine Garnsworthy, and today I have Kaylin Marcotte on the show. She's the founder of Jiggy Puzzles. They're a brand that make, instead of, puzzles that feel like a toy, they are puzzles positioned in the wellness, mental health, home decor space. She has built the business on these really beautiful artist collaborations. People like frame the puzzles after they're done. And she started the business with $25,000 of her own savings. She had the idea in 2015, but took a while. She was working at the Skimm. She was one of their first employees, which is crazy, and didn't actually launch the business until 2019. And with that $25,000, she was able to create her first run of a couple of thousand units of product. And she has some really clever ways about how to get around the minimum order quantities at some of those really bigger factories. So if you're just getting started, I feel like that's a really, really, really great tip. And now that she's a few years in, she just sold her 250,000 units of her puzzles. And that's between D2C, between her retail partnerships, people like Anthropology. And she's in this kind of stage of her business where she's ready to land into those big box retailers. So we talk about the strategy of how she's going about lining that up. And she's really grown through collaborations and partnerships. So we get into the real nitty-gritty about what does a revenue share split look like when you're working with an artist on a product like this, and how do you make the most of leveraging their audience? It's a really good, tangible conversation. As always, I ask all the follow-up questions to get the nitty-gritty details about what is working to get traction in Kaylin's business. And I hope you love it. If you do, I'm going to ask you, as always, drop us that 5-star review or take a screenshot and share to Instagram stories. I'm at Jasmine Garnsworthy, and you can find the Female Founder World community at Female Founder World. Okay, let's get into the show.
You are now entering Female Founder World with your host, Jasmine Garnsworthy.
Kaylin, welcome to Female Founder World.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, let's introduce people to Jiggy Puzzles. What is it that you're creating over there?
Yes. So Jiggy Puzzles, we are 3 years old, and really the concept was to modernize and elevate the classic jigsaw puzzle and to support emerging creatives from around the world at the same time. So each Jiggy, we've reimagined, elevated the packaging. The pieces come in a reusable glass jar in a beautiful box, and we include puzzle glue with each one so that you can frame it once you're done. And the design for the puzzle itself is each by an emerging female artist who gets a percentage of every sale. So we do profit sharing for them. And this really came from my really organic just story of puzzles being my form of meditation and stress relief. And it was the classic hobby turned side hustle turned full time. And so we are here to reconnect people with kind of downtime and mindfulness, getting away from screens, kind of back to the analog basics, and support artists at the same time.
Love that. And what were you doing before you started Jiggy Puzzles, and how did this idea come about?
Yeah, I started my career in management consulting, and I was doing kind of classic big tech consulting projects. And then I met these two young co-founders in New York who were starting a media company. And I had been a poli-sci major, and I was just really interested in the news and current events. And so once I heard what they were doing and their mission, I just was totally aligned and felt like I needed to be a part of it. So that company was the Skimm, the daily email newsletter. So I ended up joining the two co-founders as their first employee at the Skimm. And
oh, wow. I did not know that.
Yeah. So it was an awesome experience. That was the end of 2013 that I met them. So super early on. And it was just the really kind of meaty, creative, hyper growth days. I joined them at their seed round with 100,000 subscribers or so. And then by the time I left, we were post Series B, I want to say 7 million subscribers, 50 employees. So it was just those really interesting early years, and they were amazing, but they were also very stressful.
I need to know, as someone who's building a media business, how How did the Skimm get from 100,000 to
How?
5 million? Like, what happened?
I know it was a wild ride. So, I mean, the biggest things, obviously, it was a daily email newsletter, still exists, and the concept is to connect, especially millennial women with current events and the world around them. And so the concept was quick read, 5 minutes in the morning to be prepped for your day and have all the news you need. So we really kind of leaned into that, into the morning routines, and started doing a lot of social content. So again, this was like 2013, 14, 15. So the whole like much easier to kind of go viral or get discovered and have that reach on Instagram and Facebook. And so we started with just organic social content and then a ton of word of mouth, which is really where my experience came from with the Skimm, and now leading it into Jiggy is having very kind of grassroots community-based marketing. So we launched the Skimm Ambassador program, which was our, hyper user brand ambassador program of spreading the word about the Skimm, referring your friends, you become a part of this community. We have sip and skim events across the country, and really incentivizing that, just sharing and referral, word of mouth behavior. A lot of press, definitely. It was also kind of this early like tech New York scene growing in those days, these two young female founders. So it was definitely like kind of a press darling. And so media exposure helped for sure. And then some performance. So I would say organic social content, really community driven, grassroots marketing, press, and then some kind of performance and paid was like the suite that really helped hyper growth in the early days.
Okay, good to know. Back to your story. I had to stop.
So, it was just a 24/7 kind of thing. And I was so excited to be doing this. I cared so much about the mission and was really fulfilled by it. But, at the end of these long work days, I'd be looking for a way to just disconnect a little bit. And instead of just turning on the TV and, more screen time, I started doing jigsaw puzzles, and they really became my form of meditation and stress relief. I'm not great at sitting still, and kind of traditional meditation never really stuck with me. So there's something about, still having a project, something that focuses your mind and captures your attention that you're working towards, but that is still very relaxing and for me, very quieting. So I'd put on good music or a podcast or audiobook and glass of wine or tea and do a puzzle. And that became my ritual. And so it was like a year into, doing puzzles every week pretty much that really the seeds started to plant of what would I do with this? And it was the same time like, adult coloring books were having a moment, and like DIY and Pinterest. It was like, maybe there's actually an appetite for something like this, for, a really kind of old school nostalgia, but in a much more elevated and aesthetic and beautiful way. So the idea for Jiggy planted then, but I ended up staying at the Skimm for 4 years. So this was a slow burn kind of story where I didn't end up launching for like that was 2015 to 2019. So, I had years of really developing the idea, taking my time, finding vendors. Obviously, the Skimm was a startup, but all digital. So while some lessons were transferable, learning the physical product world was brand new to me. So started kind of taking that on bit by bit.
Wow. Okay. And so I read that you started the business with $25,000 of your own savings. What did that go towards, and how long did it last you?
Yeah, so that was what I launched with. So in order to launch, there's kind of the just foundational basics of, incorporating and getting the domain and setting up the site, and a lawyer to trademark the name and logo and all of that. So there was just kind of the housekeeping that, I'm going to say it was a few thousand, but then really most of it was the product itself, of course, and inventory. And because the whole concept was we wanted to elevate the packaging and not do that just cardboard box that every puzzle ever made has come in. A lot of it was very customized. And the idea of there's no other puzzle company that, includes puzzle glue and has productized it in that way. So the development of the packaging and each of the components, the pieces come in a glass jar. So sourcing that and the puzzle glue, and I didn't want to use plastic. So, okay, let's
Hold on,
use
what's
an
puzzle
aluminum. What is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's essentially, a water-based craft glue, but it's customized in that it has to be very thin to spread because it just works by getting in between the pieces once you're done. So once you finish the whole puzzle, you spread it across very thinly. It gets in between the cracks and then it dries clear. And so it just binds the pieces together. So, it has to dry completely clear and not be like putty enough to not be able to spread across the puzzle.
So you're using that so that folks can use the completed puzzle, like keep them on display.
Exactly. Since the whole concept is that each of the puzzles is essentially, a vehicle for these artists' work. So since this is a piece of art and once you're done with it, that was kind of one of my things when I was doing them. What do I do with it once I'm done with it? I put hours upon hours into it. And then once it's done, it's, like a 24 by 18 inch print, essentially. So we wanted to make it very easy to keep and actually frame. So yes, each one includes the puzzle glue and then this straight edge tool to spread the glue. And so most of the initial, just capital savings went into that product development and then the actual first production run to launch.
And then how did you get your first customers? Where did they come from?
The very first ones were my friends, of course, and that was another thing. And for anyone listening who's thinking about starting, I kind of really got comfortable with, I'm not a huge risk taker. So I was like, let me really think this through and kind of try to de-risk it for myself or get comfortable with what this could look like. Let's say I'm wrong. There's not an appetite for this, but like between friends and family and, the couple local gift boutiques that I think I could convince to buy some, like how many could I sell through? And like, am I confident putting my savings into this first production run, of X amount, and then at least that I could break even on. And so the first, was November 6th of 2019. And I put the Shopify site live and then sent an email out to all my friends and family. And so, the first handful were all friends and family. But then I do remember, the first stranger, because I'm watching each one come in, the first stranger, and it ended up being, a friend of a friend. So for a while, it was just kind of ripple effect. I asked everyone to share and help amplify. But then timing wise, it was November 6th that I launched. So we went right into holiday season. So I immediately started pitching gift guides and product lists and as many just, the commerce editors at any publication I could find. And so that certainly gave it, a little momentum out of the gate.
What was your first run of units? Like how much, you're talking about de-risking. What does that look like? Are you buying, as few as possible? What were your MOQs to begin with?
Yeah, MOQs was quite a surprise to me. I was maybe naive, but I was like, I don't know. I have this thing I want to make. Don't you guys just make things? And, it's a pretty simple relationship. I did not realize what went into partnering with a factory. It's really a partnership. It's not that transactional. And you have to convince them to even turn on the machines for you. And especially pre-launch, pre-revenue, like it's essentially a risk to them. And you have to, convince them to take a bet on you that this will be worth their time and that you'll grow with them. So the lowest I could get down to, and I got around it in a couple ways. And also for anyone, just I think thinking creatively, I got around it in a couple ways. One was, so they wanted 10,000 unit minimum. And so I was like, all right, I think I could sell like 2,000. That was the number I got comfortable with, that like even just friends, family, a couple gift boutiques, I can sell 2,000 units. So essentially I asked, okay, because, the raw materials themselves isn't where the cost, it's the printing and compiling and importing, freight, all of that. So I was like, what if I just pay for the raw materials, but you don't actually make it yet? And then I just basically have a credit for like the full 10,000, but I only take delivery on two right now. So, can try to negotiate
Yep.
in that way. One place still said no. They wanted to run the full 10,000. And even that, they were like, that's really, really low for us. I was like, all right, what if, and they basically said, it's not worth firing up the machines. Like, it's just not worth it.
Mm.
So I was like, what if we wait until the next big order you have for somebody else and you just like tack mine on to the end? And so you don't
Smart.
have to staff the whole factory for a day, just like tack it on. They were like, we could do that. You just have no control. We don't know when the next big order. So like you're just sacrificing control on your
Mm.
in-hand date. I was like, okay, I'll have some flexibility for that. So I think, really just trying to get creative. So ultimately, yeah, 2,000 units was what I took on the first delivery, and then 10. And I mean, little did I know, for the timing of anyone catching on, November 6th, 2019, basically like 3 months in business before the pandemic. So in the end, I ended up being sold out and would wished I'd gotten everything much more quickly. But yeah, it was, one of those things. Hindsight's 2020, and obviously no one could have known it was coming, but ended up getting the full delivery for that spring. And then ever since the pandemic, it's just been off to the races.
I was looking at your business and just thinking, wow, like lockdowns and COVID and just people being at home trying to find things to do with their time that weren't like staring at a screen must have been an amazing like kickstart for your company.
It was. It definitely brought, it brought a lot of just organic interest, demand. I think even like, you know, I kept thinking like publications that were willing to write about it, and like influencers or
Yeah.
celebrities that were willing, like people that would not have been like writing or thinking about puzzles. There was like an
Yeah.
openness to share that. So we did, yeah, a lot. I was just DMing every like celebrity or influencer I liked and followed, every publication, just reaching out to and trying to, seize that window. But at the same time, it also brought a lot of supply chain constraints and increasing costs and logistics and freight. I mean, we've heard the stories now of things just sitting at port and not getting off the boat, and, carriers jacking up the fuel surcharges and all of that. So it was just a constantly moving target, and came with, a great boost in demand, but also a lot more logistical headaches.
Yeah, no, I can totally understand that. So you've now sold your 250th puzzle, which is amazing. Big congrats.
Yes.
And
Thank you.
one of the strategies that you've been using to do that is really this like artist and creator partnerships and collaborations. And I think a lot of people are interested in this idea of, okay, how do I work with creators and different partners to create actual product collaborations, not just like, giveaways and newsletter partnerships, but actually like co-create a product together. How do you like walk me through the process of doing that? How do you find the right person and know that they're the right person? How do you like structure those partnerships? How long does it take? Like talk me through what that's all about.
Yeah, so we think of partnerships now in a couple main buckets. Of course, our artists. So that was like the day one model that I just started going to art fairs and shows, and looking at Instagram or looking at sites where they were selling prints of their work. So just curating these artist relationships. And for that, especially in the beginning, because I was self-funded, reached out and was essentially like, listen, I'm a small business. I want this to be a win-win. I don't have a lot of cash up front to pay like a commission, for you to commission an original for me. So why don't I pull from your existing portfolio of work, so that, we don't need, I don't want you to incur time and energy and do all this work without being compensated for it. So let's pull from your existing portfolio. Of course, I was always looking at the art in the lens of like, what would be fun to puzzle? Is there enough detail and color and layers? And so would this look beautiful when it was done, but also be a fun puzzle experience? client. So we'd review and pull from their portfolio. And then it was essentially a rev share, royalties on the back end of sales. So wanted to de-risk it a bit on the cash side up front for myself, but have it be a win-win on the back. So for artists and creatives, that's one way. I do think if you're asking them to create something new, if you want an original and you're commissioning, there does need to be an upfront cash component. But if you can't, or, just being much more generous in that case, lower cash, but higher royalties. So that's one model. Some either bigger artists, or now that we started working with brand partners as well, some will ask for like a minimum guarantee. So that essentially, whatever their commission rate would have been, instead of doing up front, they'll do it on the back end, but have to commit to at least having this minimum guarantee in sales. And so essentially, it's pulled out of the proceeds until they are made whole, and then like the rev split will kick in. So that's one, kind of the artists and partners. And now that we are also working with a lot of brands, nonprofits, for example, we've really thought about our partnership strategy as a growth vehicle to get in front of these new audiences and not just drive sales, but the visibility and just kind of top line brand awareness. So we work with brands creating a custom for them to do a gift with purchase to their audience, or just surprise and delight, bundle it together with other product to increase their average order value. So now that we've started working with that, it's either a combo of, if they have in-house assets, they have beautiful photography of their product, then the creative is kind of taken care of, and then it'll be a rev share on the back end. So I think those are the two, some kind of commission rate up front, a rev split, and kind of if you need to get creative around rev split with a minimum guarantee, kind of doing what is comfortable, gives enough upside for everyone, but isn't totally limiting, especially as like a cash flow driven, bootstrapped business.
When or when businesses in general are looking at working with an artist and they want to use like an existing piece of artwork, like what is a ballpark number about what the rev share should look like for something like that? I mean, you're obviously incurring all of the hard costs for production. So how do you make sure that that's fair, and what do people expect?
I think it really depends on the cost of goods and what the retail price is, of course. So what margin you're left with, if it's like a t-shirt and you're selling it at a high price versus a print that is just paper and commands a less price. So really figuring out the numbers on what the costs are, what the retail price is, therefore what your margins are. But anything like lowest, like 5 to 10. And then depending, we have two different production models. So for one of them, for example, which is like de-risked for us because we essentially print on demand, we can be much more generous. So this is our Jiggy Studio is what we call it, and essentially more of a marketplace where artists come on, upload their work, and then we power it. So we make the puzzle and sell it, but we only make what has sold. So for that, we do 25%, which is, I think Etsy's like 5, something like Society 6 is like 3. So honestly, sub 5 is like big players, but I wouldn't feel totally comfortable with. And so we're in the 5 to 25 range, depending on the model for production.
Cool. I want to talk about, like I feel like looking back at your story, it all kind of makes sense. You can join the dots, and it all just looks like this amazing linear growth that's things have fallen into place. But I know that starting a business is very rarely like that. Talk me through what happened with your glass jars when you were first ordering your product, and what that mistake looked like, how you overcame it, and what lessons you have for other businesses.
Yes. So I had the idea pre-launch, really just starting to develop it. I had the idea of what I wanted it to look like and be like, but I didn't know how to translate that into like a CAD file that a factory could actually make and print. So I was like, all right, at the very least, I think I still need someone to help hone and finalize this concept, but then certainly to translate that concept into like factory files. And so I went on LinkedIn and found just a grad from the School of Visual Arts in New York, and it said she did product design. So we started just iterating and would meet up and use like cardboard and cut it out and try it. And so we finally got the box down. And because I figured the box design concept and then dimensions would determine a lot. And so we placed the order for all of the paper goods, the boxes and the puzzles. But they did the boxes first. They hadn't printed the puzzles yet. And separately, we placed all the glass jar orders. So we wanted, the pieces to come in a glass jar to look very aesthetic, elevated. If you don't glue it and put it back, you can put it on your shelf. And so we ordered these glass jars with a cork lid, and had the samples that we had made ourselves, and on all the mock-ups with the dimensions, everything should fit. And then the factory, I was on like my last kind of pre-launch vacation, summer July 2019, in Costa Rica with my family, and I get a call, and the factory said the puzzles don't fit in the jars. So by now the box is fit around the jar, which is fit with everything else. So I'm like, the only thing that is still subject to change, that we even can change at this point, is the puzzle itself. We can't redo the jars. So it was actually one of those, and I think for anyone out there, take this as a lesson of like, necessity is the mother of invention, and how can you just take it and spin it and make it a thing. But basically before we had done, and some people ask sometimes like why we have 450 piece and 800 piece puzzles. Like, why is that? The standard in kind of the industry is 500 and 1,000. And so, we say and we spin it as the whole concept is that you frame your Jiggy. And so we want it to match standard frame sizes. So we had to bring them down a bit so that you wouldn't have to custom frame and incur the expense and hassle of custom framing. So we matched our puzzle sizes to standard frame sizes to help you frame it as art when you're done, which actually was a great idea. And I'm glad it worked out that way. But it came about because they wouldn't fit. So we had to shrink the puzzle to fit in the jar. And that's how we landed at 450 and 800. And then I was like, while we're at it, let's make it, 14 by 18, 18 by 24, super simple. Because I think we're like 23.7 inches. And now it's like super whole numbers that you can find at, Target for a frame.
Okay, that is just worked out. That's worked out so well for you, because it just makes so much sense. Like, of course they should fit in standard frames if that's the whole concept behind it, that it's artwork.
Yes. Total spin at first, but ended up being true.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, I love that. That must have been really stressful in the moment, though. I can just imagine you with like no Wi-Fi, trying in Costa Rica, like trying to figure out like what to do with that.
They don't fit. Yeah.
Oh God, I'm having like heart palpitations thinking about it. Okay, so we've talked a lot about getting the actual physical product, about the collaboration strategy. The last thing I wanted to touch on is retail and wholesale and how you've been growing that side of the business. Just really quickly about, are you focused on like independent boutiques? Do you use platforms like Bulletin or Fair or Away, or are you now more focused on how do I get those really big retail accounts? Like, what does your strategy look like at this point in the business?
Yeah, it's evolving. And really in the beginning, I wasn't necessarily that thoughtful about it, because I was really excited about building D2C, and I wanted that relationship. I wanted to know our customer and to have that line of communication on email and social, and see their buying behavior, and also just strategically get the data, understand, shape the early days around what behavior we were seeing. So I really focused on that. It kind of came, our first retail relationship, which ended up being a huge one, it was Anthropologie, came about very naturally. They found us on Instagram and reached out, and rented a car in New York and drove down to Philly where they're headquartered and pitched. And it was a winter, going into the release was going to be for holiday 2020. So they put this whole campaign around kind of the COVID Christmas and how puzzles were the perfect, gift of the season. And so that ended up being a much broader one than I would have anticipated. But even the decision to go with them, and then since then, how we've chosen who to partner with, it's definitely just volume. Margins are lower, of course, but volume, it can be meaningful revenue. But also, especially in the early days, I was really focused on just the brand and kind of product positioning. So something like an Anthropologie, our next accounts were Bloomingdale's and Nordstrom, and very kind of upscale curated gift boutique. And so I really wanted to get puzzles away, or at least, our puzzles get Jiggy away from like toy and games and into these much more lifestyle, gifting, home decor. And so it was much more kind of a brand and product positioning strategy of where we want to be associated and seen, and that Jiggy is not, of course it's a fun activity, but we're not positioning it as, toy and game. It's art, and it's mental health and wellness and relaxation and a fun, date night. And so that was kind of the strategy. Now that we're growing and really can scale, we are on platforms. So Fair and Bulletin are the two that we're on. And I would say, if you set it and forget it, you can get a good, just steady drumbeat, nothing huge, nothing crazy. But we also kind of see it as like free marketing. I love getting tagged in these boutiques, posts and all of their promotion. So visibility and marketing. And then what we're just starting to do, and, I'm glad we kind of waited for this step, is work with like a broker. So once you want to go mass, I've heard such horror stories of chargebacks, and if it's not, the curtain labels aren't right and all of this. So for going real mass or big box, working with a broker for that, and also someone who can kind of help advise on what does the price point need to be? Okay, do we even want this under our main brand, or is this like a sub brand? And how do all these pieces play together? So another episode, TBD, when we have, maybe a year's worth under our belt of more mainstream and what that relationship with a broker looks like. But that was one where I thought it would just be best to get some help.
How do you find a broker?
So a bunch reached out to me. I generally, and I would say like half of my inbox is just like inbound cold. Mm-hmm. And so once you have any level of visibility, or certainly any press, like you're going to get vendor inbounds like no other. But I usually just try to go through recommendations and at least ask, even if it was kind of cold inbound, at least ask for referrals and try to back channel a little bit, see who they've worked with. But for the most part, try to just from the start go through trusted recommendations. So, and like see what's in the stores, whenever I go to a Target and see what like the end caps are and what products do I think are beautifully merchandised, and I'm so impressed they got in there. Okay, who's working with them and who's repping them? So kind of reverse engineer. I do the same even with small gift boutiques. Wow. I go in because it's so fragmented to try to go one by one to gift boutiques. So our whole team, it's like our just exercise now. If we're ever in our hometowns or just, any city on vacation and we see a gift boutique, we'll go in and be like, where do you source? Are you on Fair? Do you go to gift shows? Are you going to like the New York Nows or Shop Object or all these trade shows. And so trying to reverse engineer from where we want to be and how they source.
Okay, that totally makes sense. And then the last thing that I ask everyone who comes on the show is just for a resource. So that could be a book, a podcast, a habit that you have every day, something that's been helping you as you've been building Jiggy and just, I guess, like up leveling yourself, as an entrepreneur, as a leader. What have you been doing that you think other people should get into?
So I would have, maybe if I recommended this before and it was not very accessible, it would have not been that value add, but there are actually much more accessible ways now. And so mine is coaching. And, someone described it to me as basically like therapy is like past to present and coaching is present to future. And I think coaching used to be like Fortune 500 CEOs would have executive coaches. And it's really, I think there was a whole movement around like bringing, therapy online and making it more accessible. And there are a couple of platforms doing it for coaching. One is called Skye, Skye. And basically you take an intake form, have a call. It's right now they're pretty small. So you actually have a call with the founder and she learns about your goals and then she hand matches you with one of their executive coaches. And, I forget the exact pricing, but it's not hugely unaffordable and it is an investment. But for me, especially being a solo founder, I just needed someone to like talk to, to hold me accountable, to set goals with, to bounce ideas around. And so many of those conversations were like, am I crazy? Is this going to work? Okay, here's what I want to achieve by end of week. Will you, almost like hired myself a boss. I'm like, will you make sure that I actually do what I say I'm going to do?
Yeah.
And so for me, being first time solo founder, having someone in my corner who's not a friend, not biased like my friends and family and not an investor because there's not that kind of pressure, still of the outcome. So really just someone in my corner has been hugely valuable.
Amazing. Okay, I'm going to put a link in the show notes because people are definitely going to want to check that out. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It's been so cool to hear about how you've been building Jiggy and everything you guys are doing. And honestly, thanks for being so transparent and upfront with all the details and numbers. We love that when people come onto the show.
Absolutely. We have to stick together. This is a wild ride. So happy to be a part of it.
Hey, it's Jasmine again. Okay, so if you're anything like me, you listen to conversations like that and you just want to connect with the founder and ask them specific questions about your business and what you should be doing and dig a little deeper about the stuff that you're curious about that she spoke to and that's been working in her business. And if you are a Business Bestie subscriber, we're actually hosting a session for you where you can connect with Kaylin in a really small, intimate online video call and ask her these questions and benefit from everyone else's questions that they have as well and really get that group mentorship that I think is so important when you're building your business. It's just chatting and bouncing ideas and figuring out what's working for other founders and what advice they have for you in your business. I put a link in the show notes that explains how you can join that and what it's all about. So definitely make the most of that resource. I'm really excited and actually super proud to be able to bring that to the community. We also have a download available for Business Besties, and this is just a really interesting, helpful resource that Kaylin's been using in her business that you can use as a template in yours. And that's available in the digital goods room in the Female Founder World community. Again, that is for our Business Bestie subscribers. Link is in the show notes about how to access that. All right, I'll see you at the next episode. Bye.